Beneath the endless dusk of the Imperium, a question drifts like incense over a battlefield of bones. When a civilization demands obedience as its highest virtue, what becomes of those born only to serve? The echo of that question trembles across a forgotten world Haltrix 9, where the ash never settles and the sun rises like a dying ember. Here, the first chains were not forged of iron, but of silence. Rows of laborers carved trenches into volcanic stone, their shadows long and skeletal beneath searchlights that hummed with the half-life of ancient machines. Overseers marched among them, masks carved with the sigils of purity, voices muffled by vox grills that distorted their orders into metallic growls. And the workers obeyed without hesitation, not because they feared death, but because death had already claimed every dream they once held. On this world, survival was not resistance. It was a slow surrender measured by the weight of the stones they carried. The nights on Haltrix 9 were worse than the labor. They descended like a suffocating cloak, the air thick with the scent of smoldering ores and the faint, coppery tang of blood that had seeped into the soil generations ago. In the barracks, huddled beneath rusted metal beams, thousands slept in rows so tight that even dreams had no room to expand. Children learned the rhythm of exhaustion before they learned words. Elders whispered prayers to the Emperor, some desperate, some hollow, some angry, knowing he would never reach this forsaken rock. Above them all, the planetary governor sat in a spire of obsidian glass, his throne adorned with purity seals stamped by hands that had long since withered. To him, these people were raw material, no different from the ores beneath their feet. And somewhere in the darkness, a rumor spread, a convoy of inquisitorial sigils approaching the system. The day the Inquisition arrived, the sky split open like a fresh wound. A black ship, vast and ornate, descended through sulfur clouds with the grace of a falling tomb. Chains trembled on every worker's wrists as they watched in terror, for nothing good ever came from the Inquisition, not here, not anywhere. The overseers unfurled banners, desperate to prove their loyalty, while workers were forced to kneel in the slag-ridden dust. The Inquisitor stepped forth, robes flowing like liquid midnight, his rosette gleaming with judgment. He did not greet them. Instead, he walked the lines of slaves as though examining livestock. His psychic presence pressed against their skulls, testing for heresy, for fear, for secrets. When he spoke, his voice was a quiet thunder. This world has forgotten what it means to serve. And in that moment, every heart trembled, for his judgment was never metaphorical. In the lowest mine shafts, the ones sealed for decades due to resource depletion, the slaves were forced to open pathways long abandoned. It was whispered that the Inquisitor sought something buried beneath the world's crust, something old, something dangerous. The workers dug through darkness so absolute it felt alive, scraping through black stone that pulsed faintly with trapped heat. Their hands bled freely. Blood became mortar, binding new walls and new suffering. As they descended, strange murals carved into the stone revealed themselves. Skeletal figures kneeling, chains coiled like serpents around their limbs, eyes burned out as if in offering. Overseers dismissed them as primitive art, but the slaves knew better. This world had tasted bondage long before the Imperium arrived. And now the earth itself seemed to groan, as though protesting the intrusion. The discovery came in a whisper, carried by a worker whose name had been erased from every record. In the caverns below, a vast monolith of obsidian rose from the bedrock, carved with symbols no human tongue could pronounce. It pulsed faintly, like a heart preserved in stone. The Inquisitor arrived within moments, his entourage fanning out like a living shadow. He touched the monolith, and psychic shockwaves spiraled outward, knocking slaves to their knees. He smiled, a rare, terrible expression. "A relic of the old night," he murmured. A testament to what humanity once endured. But there was something else beneath his tone, something almost reverent. For this monolith did not merely depict slavery, it emanated it. The psychic residue of millions shackled, broken, sacrificed. The overseers recoiled instinctively. The slaves felt themselves drawn toward it, as though their suffering resonated with the ancient stone. Above ground, the world began to change. Storms surged across the sky, unnatural lightning striking the governor's palace again and again until entire domes shattered. Vox systems screamed with interference, broadcasting fragmented voices that spoke of hunger, chains, and old gods that demanded submission. Slaves collapsed mid-march, clutching their heads as visions flooded their minds. Worlds burning, empires rising on the backs of the forgotten, and a colossal figure made of shadowy iron whispering promises of liberation through annihilation. Some wept, believing the emperor had finally turned his gaze upon them. Others screamed, sensing something far older stirring beneath their feet. The Inquisitor watched it all with a calm, calculating stillness, for he knew visions like these were not gifts, they were warnings. The caves grew louder with each passing day, though no voice could be identified. It was as though the monolith exhaled memory into the stone. Slaves shared the same dreams, a towering machine god forging chains measured not in links but in lifetimes. A race of masters who ruled through fear and ritual sacrifice. And a final rebellion drowned in rivers of molten metal. The Inquisitor ordered the dreams documented. The overseers, growing aggressively paranoid, beat the workers at random to restore discipline. But it was futile. Fear no longer kept the slaves obedient. They moved like ghosts through corridors of rock, touching the walls with trembling fingers, listening to the earth's lament. And in the deepest shaft, a young girl whispered a prophecy that spread like wildfire. The stone remembers. And it wants us back. As panic spread, the governor demanded answers. The Inquisitor delivered only contempt. "You built an empire of chains," he said quietly. While standing atop the ruins of one far more monstrous, he revealed fragments deciphered from the monolith, that the Hultrix 9 had once been home to a proto-human empire during the Age of Strife, an empire that thrived on cruelty beyond imagination. They enslaved entire star systems, feeding psychic engines with the souls of their laborers. When their empire fell, the survivors buried their monuments, believing stone might swallow the shame of their tyranny. Instead, those monuments preserved their sins with perfect clarity. Now, under the weight of the Imperium's own brutal order, the monolith had awakened, drawn to familiar suffering like a predator scenting blood. The first disappearance occurred at shift change. A worker simply vanished from the tunnel mouth, leaving only chains coiled neatly on the ground. Then another, and another. Overseers blamed sabotage, cowardice, escape attempts, but no tracks led outward. Instead, faint impressions led deeper into the shafts toward the monolith. The Inquisitor forbids anyone from approaching without his command, but desperation outweighed caution. A group of overseers descended into the depths with torches and shock moles, their footsteps echoing like hollow drumbeats. What they found shattered their sanity. The monolith's surface had changed, its carving shifting, reshaping into the faces of the missing eyes hollow, mouths open in silent pleas. The overseers fled, but only one returned, babbling incoherently that the stone had opened its throat. Now on the eve of planetary lockdown, the slaves gather at the mine's entrance, staring into the depths where the monolith waits. The storms above have merged into a single spiraling vortex, its core glowing with an unnatural crimson light. The governor's palace burns. The Inquisitor stands at the precipice, his rosette dim, his expression unreadable. "The past is awake," he murmurs, "and it seeks an answer." One by one, the workers step forward, drawn by a force older than fear, older than the Imperium, older even than the idea of freedom. And though none can explain why, they know the truth in their bones. Whatever lies beneath this world is not done with humanity, not yet. And as the first of them disappears into the darkness, a sound rises from below, not a scream, not a voice, but the grinding of chains being lifted, as if something long buried is preparing to stand again. The chain echo rose from the depths like a memory awakening, cold and metallic, shivering through every corridor of the mine. A line of workers stepped into the darkness, their silhouettes swallowed one by one, and the Inquisitor remained still as obsidian. Above him, the storm convulsed like a wounded beast, red lightning clawing at the sky. A squad of Astra Militarum troopers descended the ridge, lasguns raised, breath sharp in the sulphurous air. Their sergeant, a veteran with a face carved from war, stared into the abyss with a dread he could not disguise. "What command, Lord?" he asked, voice cracking despite himself. The Inquisitor did not turn. "Bear witness," he said. And the troopers felt a wave of unease wash over them, because bearing witness, in the grim annals of the Imperium, never meant survival. It meant being etched into someone else's nightmare. Far above, the ecclesiarchy shrine began to shake. Candles guttered, icons rattled against walls, and the confessor knelt before the cracked altar, whispering litanies that sounded more like confessions than prayers. His faith had never wavered through Xeno's wars, rebellions, or starvation. But tonight, as the stained glass flickered with red stormlight, he felt something new, the Emperor's silence. Not his absent silence, as though the master of mankind waited for a truth too heavy for mortal tongues. A young acolyte rushed into the chapel, eyes wide. "Father, the workers. They're descending willingly." The confessor lifted his head slowly, tears glinting where prayer met fear. "Then the world has begun its judgment," he whispered. The acolyte trembled. "By whose hand?" The confessor looked toward the storm. "That," he murmured, "is the question of the age." Deep in the mine, the first squad of soldiers followed the workers into the tunnels, boots crunching over ancient dust. Their helmet lamps carved pale circles through the darkness, illuminating jagged walls etched with symbols that twisted whenever the light shifted. Vox static hissed in their ears, whispering fragments of languages none recognized. One trooper stopped abruptly, breath held. "Sergeant." "I hear chanting." But there was no sound, only the crushing quiet of stone older than humanity's recorded sins. The deeper they went, the more the air thickened, as though memory itself became a physical weight. At last they reached a cavern where the workers knelt in a perfect circle around the monolith, their bodies trembling but unmoving. Their eyes glowed faintly, not with light, but with reflection mirroring the monolith's shifting carvings. And every soldier felt an unwelcome truth. The slaves were praying to it. The planetary governor watched the storm from the shattered balcony of his spire, robes fluttering like the wings of a dying bird. His advisors pleaded with him to evacuate, but fear had fused him to the throne. "The Inquisition will blame me," he muttered, "if the workers rise. If whatever this is spreads." His mind clawed through decades of corruption, oppression, and quiet atrocities committed under the guise of productivity quotas. Now the world itself seemed poised to reveal every hidden sin. "We cannot let that happen," he spat. "Send the dragoons. Kill anyone who approaches the mines." But even as the order left his lips, the palace trembled violently. A tower collapsed in a rain of obsidian shards, and from the smoke rose a pillar of crimson energy, spiraling into the storm above. The governor stared, pale and shaking, realizing too late that the world no longer cared for his commands, only his judgment. Back in the shrine, the confessor listened as the acolytes gathered around him, their robes soaked with dust and fear. One held a cracked slat of stone taken from the mines, covered in symbols pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. "This was found in the offering bowl," she said. "We think the workers placed it there." The confessor traced a trembling finger over the inscriptions. The carvings showed chains not as instruments of punishment, but of divine order. Servitude offered willingly, not demanded. But at the bottom, scratched with frantic desperation, was a single imperial aquila fresh and out of place. Someone recently had tried to claim the old symbol for the emperor. "A heresy born of fear," he whispered. Or a truth someone begged him to see. For the first time in decades, he questioned whether the emperor's silence meant disapproval or reluctant recognition. Deep within the cavern, the Inquisitor approached the monolith, the air rippling with the psychic pressure of history unchained. The workers remained kneeling, their breathing slow, synchronized, as though entranced by an unseen liturgy. As he pressed his palm against the stone, visions burst forth. An empire of iron towers, humanity bent beneath rulers who worshipped submission. Slaves burning in pyre engines that powered apocalyptic wars. A rebellion drowned under oceans of liquid metal. And finally, a single truth screamed across time chains, endure longer than faith. The Inquisitor recoiled, trembling. He had devoted his life to rooting out heresy, yet the monolith whispered of a truth predating the Imperium itself, that humanity had once worshipped bondage. When he turned, he realized the slaves were no longer kneeling. They were staring at him, eyes hollow, awaiting command. Or judgment. And both felt equally dangerous. Outside, the dragoons rode across the ashen plains, mechanized steeds thundering toward the mine entrance. Lenses glowed, cannons primed, Vox systems locked. But as they approached, the storm thickened. Red lightning struck the earth, melting stone into glass. The riders slowed, their mounts glitching with bursts of static. Then the ground convulsed. Obsidian pillars erupted like jagged teeth, forming a barrier around the mine. A dragoon fired, and the blast ricocheted, shredding the rider beside him. Panic rippled through the formation. They tried to retreat, but the storm swallowed them, red light tearing armor from bone. In the command center, their signals vanished one by one. The governor stared at the blank screens, realizing the planet itself had turned against him. "This world is rebelling," he whispered. "Against us." But the truth was more terrifying. It was remembering what rebellion once cost. In the cavern, the sergeant finally gathered the courage to speak. "My lord," he said quietly, "the workers. They seem to know what the stone wants." The Inquisitor's gaze remained locked on the monolith. "It is no stone," he murmured. "It is a memory, a relic of human cruelty refined into faith." He turned to the sergeant, eyes filled with something dangerously close to dread. This world embraced the Imperium because it believed the Emperor freed them from ancient tyranny. But what if our rule merely awakened what they once worshipped? The sergeant swallowed hard. "My lord, what do we do?" The Inquisitor's jaw clenched. "We decide whether this planet's past is heresy or prophecy." Then the monolith pulsed once, violently, and the cavern walls split open, revealing something buried not in stone, but in time. From the new fissure rose a colossal figure of blackened metal, humanoid yet impossibly ancient, covered in chains that writhed like serpents. Its face was a smooth, featureless mask of obsidian, reflecting every soldier, every worker, every fear. The workers began to chant, not words, but rhythmic breaths echoing the pulse of the storm. The sergeant stumbled back. "What is that?" The Inquisitor answered with shaking voice. "A sovereign of the old night, a god of bondage." The metal titan raised a hand, and every chain on every wrist in the cavern shivered in response. The slaves knelt as if greeting a long-lost king. And in that moment, the Inquisitor understood something devastating. This world had not been enslaved by the Imperium. It had been protected from the memory of its original master. Until now. And as the Titan's hollow face turned toward the surface, the storm above broke open, revealing a swirling rift of crimson light. The governor screamed, the confessor dropped to his knees, and every soul on Valhaltrix 9 felt the truth settle like a blade at their throat. The past had not merely awakened. It had returned to reclaim its throne. The Titans rise toward the cavern air into shards of terror and awe, and as its chains writhed with unnatural hunger, the Inquisitor felt something he had not felt since childhood faith, slipping like sand through desperate fingers. Above them, Valhaltrix 9 groaned under the weight of awakening memory. Entire mountainsides cracked, releasing geysers of steam that tasted of iron and centuries-old sorrow. The sergeant whispered a prayer, each word trembling. "Emperor, guide us." But the Emperor's name felt fragile here, like a candle lit against a hurricane of ancient will. Around the Titan, the workers bowed lower, their faces serene with a devotion not taught by any priest. A devotion older than scripture, older than unity, older than hope. And deep within the Inquisitor's mind, a whisper crawled from the monolith. You did not break their chains. You only replaced them. Far above, the confessor stood atop the chapel's crumbling bell tower, watching the sky distort into a bruised storm of red and black. Memories of his earliest sermons rose unbidden when he preached salvation, purpose, devotion. When faith had felt like a bridge between mortal suffering and divine certainty. Now, that bridge trembled beneath him, stone cracking under the weight of whispered truths. The acolytes below him clung to each other as the chapel walls buckled. "Father," one cried, "is this the end of faith?" He closed his eyes, feeling the storm's heat kiss his face. "No," he said softly. "This is the end of certainty." The sky split open, revealing the silhouette of the bound Titan rising slowly toward the surface, and the confessor felt a truth coil around his heart. The Emperor's silence was not abandonment. It was grief. On the outskirts of the capital, the dragoons who survived the storm staggered through the ash fields, armor scorched, minds fractured. One rider dismounted, clutching his helm as whispers clawed his skull. Chains materialized in his thoughts, chains, linking the past to the present, linking him to every ancestor who had lived and died on Valhaltrix 9. He screamed, firing into empty air as the whispers grew louder, until the vox crackled with a chilling clarity. "Do not resist," a voice said, calm, heavy, ancient. "You have always served us." The dragoon dropped to his knees as the ground trembled. In the distance, the Titan's massive form pierced the horizon like a spear aimed at the heavens. And as he wept, believing he saw visions of his lineage kneeling before it, he realized the truth that would shatter the world. The people of Valhaltrix 9 had belonged to this god long before the Imperium claimed them. Inside the mine, the Inquisitor fought to steady his breath as the Titan lifted its head fully. Its chains clattered in a rhythm too deliberate to be random, like a ritual, a language of metal and memory. He stepped forward, ignoring the sergeant's desperate warning. "Identify yourself," he commanded, voice shaking. The Titan turned its smooth, mirror-like face toward him, and for an instant, he saw himself, then the faces of every slave on the planet layered over his own. When it finally spoke, its voice was not sound but gravity, bending the air around them. "I am Dominion, the memory of your species before it learned to fear itself." The Inquisitor staggered, realizing the most blasphemous truth imaginable. This being did not see itself as humanity's enemy. It saw itself as humanity's origin. At the governor's palace, panic mutated into madness. Advisors shouted over each other, soldiers fired at shadows, and the governor clawed at his own face as psychic pressure pressed down on the building like a massive invisible hand. "It's reading us," he shrieked. "It knows everything." The walls bled dust as cracks spread like lightning through the marble. The lights flickered, revealing phantom impressions of ancient rituals, spectral laborers forging chains, kneeling beneath giants, offering obedience like currency. The governor saw himself reflected in each one, a tyrant born of tyrants, a custodian of an ancient cruelty disguised as imperial order. As the ceiling collapsed in a rain of broken stone, he understood the nightmare's final twist. The Imperium had not saved Valhaltrix 9 from its past. It had repeated it. And the world, awakening, wanted the cycle completed. In the chapel, the confessor gathered his remaining acolytes, each pale with the weight of visions that had seeped through their dreams. "Listen to me," he said, gripping their trembling hands. "Faith is not obedience. Faith is endurance." He looked at the cracked aquila above the altar, remembering every sermon preached to people whose suffering had been dismissed as destiny. "The Emperor never desired chains," he whispered, "but we forged them in his name." The acolytes stared, stunned, as he placed the stone tablet taken from the mines upon the altar. Its symbols glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. "This relic does not show a rival faith," he said. It shows our reflection. Thunder shook the chapel, and the confessor felt the Titan's presence approaching. If we are to stand, he said, voice steadying, we must choose whom we serve, truly. On the plains, Astra Militarum reinforcements finally arrived, but their battlefield had already shifted into a nightmare. The ground rippled like living flesh, chains erupting beneath their boots. Soldiers screamed as steel serpents coiled around them, dragging them into the earth. Psychers fell convulsing, overwhelmed by visions of entire human civilizations kneeling in synchronized worship. The captain barked orders, firing blindly into the storm, but the lightning absorbed the shots like hunger made manifest. Then the Titan emerged fully from the ground, towering over tanks like a monument to forgotten sovereignty. Its chains whipped outward, connecting to the slaves who followed it like pilgrims. The Psychers suddenly spoke in unison, voices hollow. We do not face a heresy. We face the truth we buried. And at that moment, every soldier felt the Emperor's light flicker within them, tiny, fragile, fighting against a tide of ancestral devotion. Inside the cavern's ruins, the Inquisitor gathered the surviving troopers, eyes blazing with a mixture of terror and conviction. We cannot allow this entity to reclaim the planet, he said. Not because of faith, because of history. The sergeant stepped forward, hesitating. My lord, what if the people want it back? The Inquisitor's jaw tightened. Then they will be purged for humanity's survival. But as he spoke, the monolith behind him cracked open, revealing a core of molten memory images of humans willingly binding themselves to dominion, forging their fate in chains of their own design. The Inquisitor stared, trembling, realizing the unthinkable. This Titan had not enslaved them. They had enslaved themselves to it, willingly, devoutly. The monolith pulsed once, and the Inquisitor felt a question stab into his mind. If humanity chooses its own bondage, is it heresy or truth? As the Titan reached the capital outskirts, the storm above it spiraled into a perfect, unnatural halo. Workers gathered around its feet, chanting without words, their chains vibrating in harmonic resonance. The confessor stepped into their path, robes tattered, holding the stone relic before him. If you remember this god, he shouted, remember also the suffering it demanded. The workers paused, faces torn between devotion and confusion. You fled this being once, he cried. You sought freedom in the Emperor's light. One worker stepped forward, eyes glowing faintly. The Emperor brought order, she said softly. But dominion gave us purpose. The confessor felt his heart fracture. Purpose is not peace, he whispered. Obedience is not salvation. The Titan paused, chains slowing. It turned its head toward him, and for a single heartbeat, the confessor felt something impossible acknowledgement. But then came the twist that shattered every certainty the Imperium had forged. The Titan lifted its hand and the chains responded, not by binding, but by breaking. Every slave shackle across the planet cracked open, falling to the ground in ringing waves. The workers gasped as metal fragments scattered like silver tears. The Titan spoke across the world, voice rumbling through dust and bone. I do not reclaim you. I release you. For you belong to the one who breaks chains, not to the one who forged them. And in that moment, the storm above shifted, revealing for the first time in living memory, a faint golden light piercing the crimson clouds. The planet fell silent. Even the Inquisitor froze, trembling. For the implication was undeniable, heretical, world-breaking. Dominion had not come to enslave humanity. It had come to remind humanity of the chains it had placed upon itself and to free it. And as the golden light widened, the confessor whispered the revelation with shaking breath. By the throne. The Emperor was never silent. He was waiting. The silence after the Titan's proclamation was not peace, it was a pressure. A vast and trembling pause, as if the entire planet inhaled at once and forgot how to breathe. Chains lay scattered across the ground like shed skins, their broken links glinting beneath the widening golden light that pierced the storm. Workers touched their wrists in disbelief, as though freedom were a wound rather than a blessing. The Inquisitor staggered back, face pale beneath the glow. "This is manipulation," he hissed, but even he felt the tremor of doubt coil like a serpent around his spine. Dominion stood motionless, immense as a forgotten god, its chains hanging slack for the first time in 1,000 generations. The sergeant whispered, "My lord." It freed them, and the Inquisitor answered with a voice cracked by fear. "Nothing frees without owning what it releases." The confessor stepped closer, clutching the relic to his chest as the golden light warmed the ruins around him. It felt like dawn and emotion this world had not seen in centuries. Yet the warmth carried sorrow, a heavy yearning that pressed against his heart. He fell to his knees, tears blurring his vision. "If this is your sign," he whispered to the unseen emperor, "then speak it clearly. I am your servant, not your interpreter." A wind swept through the broken chapel, scattering ashes like a final benediction. Behind him, acolytes murmured uncertain prayers, torn between awe and dread. One approached timidly. "Father, are we witnessing salvation?" He shook his head slowly. "No, we are witnessing truth. And truth is rarely merciful." Above them, the Titan's chains rattled once more, as if stirred by distant thunder. On the battlefield outside the capital, Astra Militarum soldiers pulled themselves from the soot, staring in disbelief at the shattered shackles lying beside the corpses of their foes. Some trembled in gratitude. Others recoiled as if the metal might bite them. The captain knelt, gathering a handful of broken links in his trembling glove. "Emperor, protect us," he muttered. "What does this mean?" A young trooper beside him whispered, "It means we're on the wrong side." The captain struck him, but even his fury felt hollow. The distant Titan loomed over the horizon, its silhouette framed in unnatural sunlight. "We hold fast," the captain barked, though his voice cracked. "Even if the planet itself rebels." But in his mind, an unspoken question gnawed at him. If liberation came from the wrong god, did the Imperium still deserve obedience? Deep below, in the gutted cavern where the monolith pulsed like a wounded heart, the Inquisitor knelt before its glowing core, fists clenched until blood seeped between his fingers. The sergeant watched in unease as the monolith carved new symbols into its own surface-shifting images of broken chains, kneeling titans, and a blazing sun fracturing the sky. "My lord," the sergeant whispered, "the workers aren't rioting. They're awakening." The Inquisitor rose slowly, a fire rekindling in his eyes. "Awakening is the first step to rebellion," he said coldly. "Rebellion is the first step to damnation." Yet even as he declared it, the monolith whispered to him, whispered truths his training forbade him to hear. Truths about the Imperium's founding, its buried pacts, its forgotten sins. And for the first time, he feared the possibility that heresy and history were the same thing. The governor crawled from the rubble of his palace, coughing blood, his once opulent robes torn and stained. The world he ruled through fear and quotas now trembled beneath him, and broken chains littered the marble around his quivering hands. Servitors flickered nearby, failing to determine whether to assist him or abandon him. "This isn't happening," he croaked. "The workers owe us their loyalty." A shattered mirror beside him reflected his face, twisted, desperate, and unmasked by power. Rage surged in him like a last dying breath of tyranny. "Send word to orbit," he rasped. "If this planet turns against the Imperium, we burn it." But no communications responded. The storm choked every signal. And as a distant tremor shook the world, the governor realized with dawning horror that he had already lost control, not to rebellion, but to revelation. The confessor left the chapel, moving through streets fractured by seismic groans. Civilians gathered around him, eyes wide, clutching fragments of chains as though they were relics instead of ruin. "Father," a woman pleaded, holding up her broken shackles, "does this mean the Emperor forgives us?" The confessor brushed dust from her face gently, like a father to a grieving child. "Forgiveness is not given," he said. "It is lived." But even as he spoke, he felt the Titan's presence swell behind him, its shadow stretching like tendrils of memory across the city. For a moment, the confessor sensed something new, something not alien, but profoundly human. Dominion did not radiate divinity. It radiated inheritance, a mirror of humanity's oldest instinct: to kneel, to obey, to belong. Faith must choose its master, he whispered. Or it is not faith at all. Astra Militarum reinforcements descended in dropships, engines roaring like angry gods. They landed in tight formations, expecting resistance, but instead found workers standing calmly, unarmed, chains shattered at their feet. The commanding officer strode forward, bolt pistol raised. "You are ordered to submit to Imperial authority," he shouted. A worker stepped forward, unflinching. "We submit to truth." The officer fired, but the bolt round stopped mid-air, squeezed by an unseen force until it crumpled. The Titan's shadow spread across the field, and its voice rolled like thunder. No more chains. Soldiers faltered, their training collapsing beneath ancient instinct. And as a psychic shockwave rippled outward, half the regiment collapsed in silent visions. Visions of a time before the Imperium, when humanity's chains were chosen, not imposed. In the cavern's ashes, the Inquisitor placed his hand on the monolith once more, forcing himself to endure the visions. He saw a civilization rising on obedience, thriving on unity, not born of fear but of purpose. But then he saw its downfall, saw Dominion bound by its own followers. When devotion rotted into tyranny, the Inquisitor's breath shook. "You were imprisoned," he murmured, "by the very people who worshipped you." The monolith pulsed in answer, and he felt the weight of paradox settle into his bones. Dominion had been both liberator and jailer, both god and slave. And now it had returned not to reclaim its throne, but to reject it. All chains broken, including its own. Then why return? He whispered. The monolith answered with a final burning truth. Because the Imperium resurrected what history tried to bury. In the capital square, Dominion moved forward, chains dragging like rivers of rusted memory. The workers followed in silent procession, not fanatics but witnesses. The confessor stepped into the Titan's path once more, heart pounding. "If you are not our master," he said, raising the relic, "then what are you?" Dominion paused, the chains stilled, and its towering silhouette leaned forward, voice shaking the foundations of the city. "I am what you were. I am what you denied. I am the truth the Emperor did not erase, because he could not." The confessor's breath caught, not defiance, not blasphemy, a wound. Yet even that wound carried warning. The golden light above flickered as if struggling against some unseen force. Dominion slowly extended a massive hand, not to strike, but to reveal something clenched within its metallic fingers. The Inquisitor arrived at that same moment, emerging from the dust with a fury forged from clarity and terror. He saw what Dominion held, a sphere of compressed memory, a psychic fragment carved from the monolith itself. Within it swirled the origins of Dominion, the fall of the ancient empire, the birth of the Imperium, and one final secret that could unmake the foundation of human belief. The confessor staggered back, whispering, "What did we bury?" Dominion lowered the sphere, and for the first time, its voice trembled. "The Emperor did not silence your past. He hid it from himself." The confessor froze, breath strangled in his throat. The Inquisitor drew his weapon, eyes wide with a terror deeper than faith. And above them, the golden light flickered violently, as if reacting, remembering. Awakening. Time held its breath. The climax approached like a blade suspended above the throat of history. The first roar was not sound, but gravity itself convulsing, as if the planet exhaled in terror before the living could. The Loyalists felt it through the bones of the earth, a tremor like a buried colossus stirring beneath their boots. Then came the sky, split open by streaks of fire, dropships falling like judgment itself, each one carrying men and truths that had been waiting centuries to ignite. The slaves in the deep pits froze mid-breath, their chains humming as dust rained from the cavern ceilings. Some believed it was the Emperor answering their secret prayers. Others thought it was the universe finally noticing their suffering, but the overseers knew better. They ran, they always ran first. And in the echo of their boots, the enslaved felt the first hint of a world about to be unmade. The custodian who had survived the demon's whisper stood upon the outer battlements, armor cracked and soul unsteady, watching the invaders descend. They were not Xenos, not traitors, not even rebels. They were Imperial, bearing seals older than the fortress itself, flags once thought lost in some forgotten archive. A reclamation force sent by High Lords who no longer trusted the High Lord who claimed this world. Loyalty, he realized, had become a labyrinth, and everyone who walked it was already dead. The winds shrieked over the metal trenches below, carrying prayers, curses, and fragments of hymns from soldiers who no longer knew which version of the Emperor they were fighting for. He whispered a vow not to truth, but to those who could not defend themselves. The first breach erupted like a sun dying. Walls of ceramite peeled outward, molten edges dripping like tears as shockwaves tore through the slave districts. Silence followed for an instant, a silence thick enough to suffocate, before screams filled it, layered, human, desperate. The enslaved fled toward the outer corridors, clutching one another, driven by instinct rather than hope. Above them, loyalist and loyalist clashed in a storm of bolter fire, blue and gold against black and red. Both sides shouting oaths to the same god, invoking the same sacred duty. In that madness, a young girl who had never seen daylight found herself standing before the shattered gate. Light touched her skin for the first and possibly last time. She raised her hands toward the burning sky, unsure whether she was being saved or condemned. Deep within the catacombs, the archprefect performed his final ritual. Surrounded by relics stolen from 100 worlds, he knelt before a statue carved from the bones of saints long forgotten. His trembling hands held a data scroll marked with sigils of an order that should not exist. The truth within it had burned his mind for years, a truth about the slave pits, their origin, their purpose, about the Emperor's design, or the lie made in his name. Now, with loyalists at his gates, he realized he was not defending a world, but burying a secret older than any of them. He pressed the scroll to the statue's chest and whispered an apology, not for his sins, but for the revelation he had preserved. Then he rose, hearing the drums of war approaching like executioners. The battlefield became a furnace. Bolter rounds screamed through the smoke, each impact sending fountains of dirt and blood into the air. The custodian plunged into the melee, every strike of his guardian spear fueled by something far older than doctrine, grief, perhaps, or guilt. Around him, discipline collapsed into desperation, as soldiers witnessed horrors they had never been trained to understand. Civilians running into the open, arms raised, begging for deliverance. Children clinging to the legs of warriors towering above them. Slaves attacking their former masters with broken tools and rusted chains, fighting not for ideology, but for the simple right to breathe. And above it all, the invaders pressed forward, unyielding, chanting one phrase over and over, for the Emperor's true decree. In the command bunker, General Varkos stared at the tactical displays with a face carved from stone. His own forces were fracturing, doubts spreading faster than the enemy could kill. He turned to his aide, a man raised from childhood to believe obedience was salvation. "Do you understand what this means?" the general asked. The aide nodded, though he clearly did not. Varkos dimmed the displays and whispered, "The Imperium is not fighting us. It is correcting us." The words left his mouth heavy, treacherous. He knew the penalty for speaking them. But as the bunker shook and distant thunder cracked the sky, he realized something profound. He no longer feared punishment, only obscurity. Only dying without being remembered by those he had failed to protect. Among the ruins of the chapel district, the enslaved girl wandered through a snowfall of ash, her skin glowing faintly in the light of burning spires. She came upon a massive figure kneeling amidst toppled statues, A loyalist Terminator, helmet shattered, face bloodied, murmuring a prayer through cracked lips. "Child, run," he whispered, seeing her approach. But she did not run. Instead, she touched his gauntlet, her small hand fitting between the giant's armored fingers. The Terminator shuddered at the warmth. "Is this judgment?" she asked. He tried to answer, but pain silenced him. Then she said something so quiet he almost thought it was memory, not sound. "If the Emperor sees us, why does he let us suffer?" The question pierced him deeper than any blade ever could. As night bled across the horizon, the Custodian reached the central citadel. It was already half ruined, its once glorious towers now black wounds against the dying stars. Inside, he found the Archprefect standing before the bone statue, hands resting on the sealed data scroll. "You came too late," the prefect said. The Custodian raised his spear, but the prefect only smiled sadly. "Do you know what this world truly is, Custodian? Do you know why these people were taken, why they were hidden, why they were bred?" The Custodian demanded the truth, and the prefect replied with a whisper that shook the hall. "They are not slaves. Not truly. They are a contingency." The Custodian did not understand, not yet. The prefect continued. "A genetic reservoir. A last resort. A sin disguised as protection." Explosions rocked the citadel as enemy forces closed in. Dust drifted from the vaulted ceiling like falling ages. The Custodian tightened his grip, demanding the scroll. But the prefect stepped backward, clutching it to his chest. "If they discover this, they will purge the entire sector," he warned. "Your war today is nothing compared to the cleansing that will follow." For a moment, both men simply stared at one another, caught between conviction and terror. Then the prefect's voice softened. "You think you are here to free slaves, but you are here to bury a secret the Imperium cannot allow to live." The Custodian felt the ground shift beneath the weight of the words. For the first time in centuries, uncertainty crept into his immortal heart. Outside, the battle reached a pitch so violent the night itself seemed to fracture. Loyalists turned on loyalists. Civilians ran toward newly formed craters, as if the earth could swallow them into safety. And high above in the heavens, a new light appeared, a ship breaking orbit, its engines burning with the fury of a dying star. Not part of the invasion, not part of the defense, something else, something older, something summoned by the truth the prefect had protected. The Custodian looked toward the sky, feeling the psychic tremor ripple through reality. The prefect saw it too and whispered, "They've come." The world seemed to hold its breath. In the distance, the enslaved girl looked up, and for the first time since the war began, she felt cold. And as the unknown vessel descended, the truth that could unmake empires drew closer, not to strike, but to be revealed. The vessel descended without fire or fury, only a slow, inevitable glide through the wounded sky. Its hull shimmered with an age no mortal tongue could name, each surface reflecting visions of dead worlds and forgotten victories. As it touched the scorched plains outside the citadel, the battlefield fell silent, not from ceasefire, but from awe. Soldiers lowered their weapons, slaves paused mid-flight. Even the Custodian felt a quiver of something ancient in his bones. A ramp unfurled, releasing a gust of cold air that carried the scent of old voids and unopened tombs. No figure emerged, no envoy stepped forward. It simply waited, humming with a resonance that felt like memory. And as the dust drifted around it, the girl among the ruins felt a whisper in her mind, as if the stars themselves were inhaling. The Custodian moved toward the vessel, his armor dragging through ash, every step the weight of 1,000 judgments. His breath fogged the air, not from chill but from the pressure of unseen forces pressing against his presence. Behind him, the Archprefect staggered forward, clutching the data scroll as though clinging to the last heartbeat of the world. "You cannot open it," he murmured, voice cracking like old parchment. But the Custodian did not answer. He reached the ramp, hand trembling for the first time in millennia. His fingertips brushed the surface, and a pulse of light rippled outward, illuminating the battlefield with a pale, mournful glow. Warriors knelt without knowing why. The enslaved bowed their heads. Even the dying stopped screaming. The ship responded as if recognizing something, not authority but sorrow. Within that light, visions unfurled like the pages of a cosmic chronicle. Not words, images, impressions. A galaxy before the age of strife, before the Imperium, when hope still had a name. Children running across marble plazas beneath a golden sky. Cities rising without chains. People living without fear of shadow or flame. And then, the collapse. Warp storms, screams, empires burned to cinders. The vision shifted to the invention of contingency worlds, hidden beneath layers of secrecy, created to hold the genetic remnants of lost cultures. The slaves were never property, they were echoes. Archives of what humanity had once been, locked away to preserve purity the universe would otherwise devour. The custodian staggered, breath ripped from him. The archprefect wept openly, his tears tracing lines in the soot on his face. And the ship's glow dimmed, as if exhausted by memory. The girl stepped forward, drawn not by knowledge but by instinct. She had no lineage in the old worlds, no memory encoded in her blood, or perhaps she had more than any of them. Her presence halted the visions. The ship's lights softened, bending gently toward her as if recognizing a long-lost rhythm. When she placed her hand upon its ancient hull, the ground vibrated, spreading a tremor through ruined stone and shattered steel. The custodian found himself kneeling without command. The soldiers did the same. Even the archprefect bowed his head, scroll slipping from his hands, rolling across fractured earth. The child whispered a single word, though none could say if it was her voice or something speaking through her. Remember. And in that moment, every person present felt the burden of forgotten centuries settle upon their souls. Outside the citadel walls, fires continued to smolder. The sky darkened, not with smoke, but with an encroaching stillness. The kind that follows after a storm has torn everything it could from the land. Troops who once fought each other now wandered aimlessly, laying down their weapons in quiet disbelief. Overseers fled into the wilderness. Others fell to their knees begging forgiveness. The enslaved formed small circles, holding one another, as though clinging to the fragile realization that they were more than victims. They were heirs to something sacred, something stolen from them in the shadows of history. The custodian walked among them with slow, deliberate steps, his towering form softened by the weight of what he had seen. Each bowed to him, not in fear, but in shared mourning. For the first time, he bowed back. Hours passed like drifting embers. The ship remained silent, a monument to truths too vast for words. The archprefect, resigned to his fate, approached the custodian with the broken scroll in hand. "What becomes of us now?" he asked, voice hollow. The custodian studied him for a long moment, then looked at the horizon where dawn should have been. "Nothing becomes of us," he finally said. "We simply continue." The prefect closed his eyes, accepting a destiny no longer shaped by lies or power. "The High Lords will come," he whispered. "They will demand answers." The custodian's expression did not change. "Then they will hear the truth." A silence followed, not peaceful, but heavy. The kind that comes before a future impossible to comprehend. At the ruins of the chapel, the Terminator lay dying, surrounded by shattered icons and crushed stained glass. The girl found him again, her small hands tracing the cracks in his armor. "Are you afraid?" she asked. He coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Only of being forgotten," he said. She frowned. "But you won't be." The soldier tried to smile. "Child, in this galaxy, nothing is remembered for long." She shook her head, lifting a piece of glass that reflected the ship's pale light. "This will remember you." And as he watched her place the shard beside him like a sacred relic, a strange peace washed over him. Not salvation, not hope, but stillness. a gift rare enough to feel holy. By nightfall, an uneasy equilibrium settled over the battlefield. Fires dimmed, prayers softened. The moans of the wounded faded into breathing, then into sleep. The custodian stood alone before the ship, its metallic skin reflecting the last traces of fading starlight. He placed his palm against it, whispering a vow no one else could hear, a vow not of allegiance, but of guardianship. He felt the vessel's silent acknowledgement, like a cathedral bowing to a pilgrim. Behind him, the people of the world began gathering among the ruins, forming quiet gatherings as they spoke of freedom like it was a fragile relic, newly unearthed. The archprefect watched them from afar, hallowed by the truth that he had preserved them only by imprisoning them. When dawn finally broke, thin, pale, hesitant, it revealed a world irreversibly changed. Smoke curled gently into the air like incense rising from a censer. The enslaved walked unchained for the first time in generations, yet their steps were slow, unsure, as though freedom itself were a landscape they had never been taught to traverse. Warriors rebuilt makeshift altars from debris, offering prayers not for victory, but for understanding. And the girl stood atop the citadel ruins, watching the sun rise over a land scarred yet alive. In her eyes flickered reflections of that ancient vision, cities of gold, skies of peace, echoes of what humanity once was and could have been again. As the custodian joined her, the question hung between them like a ghost. "Will they come for us?" she asked. He looked at the horizon where Imperial ships might one day appear. "Yes," he said quietly. "They always come." She nodded, absorbing the inevitability with the calm of someone who had already seen worlds burn. "Then what do we do?" The custodian's gaze drifted toward the waiting ship, ancient, silent, immeasurable. "We endure," he whispered, "and we remember." She took his hand. Not as a relic, not as a symbol, but as a protector, a witness, a remnant of a truth too vast for the Imperium to ever truly bury. And in the dimming starlight of a wounded world, a final thought settled over them both. A question that stretched across time like a prayer carved into the bones of history. If humanity must sacrifice its memory to survive, does it remain human? And another, quieter still. When faith demands blindness, who will dare to open their eyes? If you want more Warhammer lore stories, mysteries, and Grimdark explorations, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments.